Hello everyone, welcome to the DIF. This is the grand finale of the DIF Startup Day that's been running all day. We've had 12 startups pitching over the course of the day. We've narrowed it down to 3, and today we're going to decide a winner live on air at the DIF, and that company will get a membership to the CE100. My name's Joe Murphy. I lead the CE100 for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And before we get into picking our winner, we have 2 great guests who have travelled far and wide to join us here today on the DIF sofa to talk about innovation, investment, and potentially the next circular economy unicorn, or the first circular economy unicorn. So we've got Jeff from Creolus and John from Stuffster. Guys, you've seasoned pitchers. To get us going, could you give us a 60-second pitch of what Stuffster's is all about, John?
Sure, absolutely. So Stuffster has a vision of no unused stuff. So we want to see everything that's made be used fully and then reprocessed and used again. And we do that by partnering with retailers to provide instant buyback of every item. So as a consumer, you can buy something with the knowledge that you'll always be able to get the residual value of that item. And to capture that, all you have to do is go into your retailer account. You'll see your last 5 years of purchases. Every item will have a stamp on it of an instant purchase price, instant buyback price. And I just select the items I want to sell back. I say go, and the courier comes to my door for free, picks the item up. As soon as the courier picks the item up, I get transmitted that payment in the form of store credit. So within an hour, everything is picked up, hauled away, I'm paid, I'm completely done. And we just finished a pilot with the UK retailer John Lewis. That was one of the most successful pilots they've done in recent memory. We had 100% customer satisfaction. We had just tremendous results from that. And so we're now looking to scale this really rapidly and get it out there.
So it's a digital inventory of all of your stuff and a seamless process to liquidate that and sell it, and the infrastructure behind all of that to get the money in your pocket and the stuff out of your door as quickly as possible.
That's right, and the focus has always been on making it so simple for people to capture this value and recirculate their things that they'll do that before they leave something sitting around piling up in a closet or an attic or cluttering up their homes.
And everyone can relate to
I think
wanting to
just
shift
about everyone
clutter.
can relate to that.
Okay, so
yes.
you've got a big target market out there.
Yes.
Jeff, Creolus, slightly different because you're a fund, but give us the 60-second pitch for Creolus.
Sure. Okay, so firstly, thanks very much for inviting me. Creolus, we are intended to be one of the early stage investors in science to help change the planet and bring to the fore circular economy. So we're a unique mix of scientists, entrepreneurs, and investment professionals. So putting that together, what we, in short, are able to do, we understand the science, we understand how to protect that science, and then we also have people with operational experience, real operational experience, on how to build a business. So we know how to build a business around that science. So that's what we do. We're mid-fundraise, so anybody interested in assisting, well, that's wonderful. But what makes us different is that we go in very, very early. We'll look at innovations that are still in the test tube. As opposed to proof of concept, because we've got people who really understand the technology roadmap, the financial roadmap, because we've seen it right from the word go.
Okay, and you're looking for money out there. What type of money will you get out of bed for? I mean, is this a few hundred quid, a few grand, or in the millions? What are you looking for?
Well, if we're talking about to go into the fund, we're intended to be a 50 million fund, 50 million pound fund. Which enables us to look at lots and lots of new ideas, and the sort of money that we would be looking to invest in some of the technologies, about £200,000, all the way up to potentially 5 million, depending on where they sit in the growth phase of their businesses.
So you're not looking for guys like me, basically, to put money into your fund?
Unfortunately, you have to, in order to do that, unfortunately, because of FCA rules, you have to be a sophisticated investor, apparently, to be able to come in. So.
Okay, well fine. I'll take that. But
I'm sorry.
He seems pretty sophisticated to me.
Yeah, I think just about.
Yeah. It's the investor bit that we're questioning, not the sophistication.
Yeah.
When you're saying science projects, can you just give us an example of the type of technology or process that you're investing in?
Okay. So we really are looking for things that potentially can transform this planet. Just look at, and we're totally focused on plastics and finding new materials to either replace, repurpose, and or redesign plastics, or based from fossil fuels. So an example would be a new technology for a new material that can hold, let's say, water, or can hold condiments. That kind of thing would be very, very interesting to us. I'm sure many people know about, there are some new technologies where organisms actually eat the plastics as a way to, could be used as a way to recycle. That's the kind of stuff we're very, very interested in. Things that don't necessarily have to have been proven, but something that we could really get our teeth into to understand, something that really could transform. Because the plastics market, if you look at it purely from a numbers perspective, we estimate is worth about $470 billion a year. So if we can find some innovations that actually can help transform that and be commercially viable, then you're looking at a pretty good return, as well as saving the planet. That's the bit that we're really excited about.
Excellent. And we didn't just rope you guys in off the streets of cows. You both have some quite unique experience already building businesses, exiting businesses. And John, you've got a Jeff Bezos story somewhere in your locker. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you've done before this?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm what's lovingly referred to as a serial entrepreneur. Okay. It's kind of an addiction. It's something that you just, I think, are born with to some extent. But yes, I've been doing this for a long time. I have many, many scars to show for it. I think both of us have quite a few scars to show for this. But yes, I mean, it goes all the way back to the early days of the internet and the web. And I had a lead investor, a gentleman named John Doerr of a firm called Kleiner Perkins, and he was really out in front in driving the commercialization of the web. And so in addition to the company I had started at the time, which was called MusicNet, he made the original investment in Amazon. He made the original investment in Netscape, which became kind of the father of all browsers. He ultimately made the first investment in Google. So I got to see that revolution really from the inside out, which was an amazing experience. And so after several years of kind of working in media technology, venture-backed startups, I then kind of stepped back and went into kind of more sustainability, which is something I'd been connected with earlier in my career, and began merging entrepreneurial pursuits with sustainability because I just feel there's tremendous opportunity. And from that, ended up joining the team with a company called GetAround, which was pioneering peer-to-peer car sharing, so kind of Airbnb for cars in San Francisco.
That was your tagline, right? The Airbnb.
That was the tagline. Yes, it was. And we were actually, all these companies, I mean, GetAround, Airbnb, Uber, TaskRabbit, we were all in about a 3-block radius in the south part of San Francisco, and there was a real vibe there, and this idea that we can kind of all together make this great sharing economy, come to life. But for me, GetAround was really fundamentally about putting to use the 92% idle time of cars. Right, we have these amazing assets that are sitting there doing absolutely nothing for 22 hours a day, and so by letting people share those, we could begin to actually get use out of it, and just better use of our resources. And so Stuffster actually grew from that because I began to look at all the other things we buy and own and how little those things were being used. And it was just appalling, right? I mean, 80% of the things used less than once a month, 70% ultimately going directly into landfill. And so Stuffster from the start was an attempt to see, is there some way we can systemically change that flow? Can we really just change the system in that way? And that was the goal from the very beginning. And maybe a little later in the conversation we can talk about how we got those scars. But yes,
we'll come back to that because I also want to hear from Jeff, because you also have your own story of being. Well, let's go back to the beginning. So where did it start for you?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think a little bit like John in terms of where we are now is that huge accumulation of who we were. I was a scientist. I started off doing genetics. I studied genetics at university. Took an industrial year out, worked in Denmark, helped to create a new breed of wheat. So I was really fascinated by, I suppose, saving the planet back then, actually, at the age of 18, 19. Then through various meetings with different people. I actually went into law. I was a lawyer pretty much for nearly 20 years. But intellectual property, which is based on science and understanding how to protect that science, that's what I was really interested in. I even wrote a book on it. It's mildly geeky. So
You've
yes,
got a book in
yes,
stores?
it is. It's
What's it called?
No, we'll talk about it. It's 7 years old now, so
Okay.
so it's still there. But it's just Google me, as they say. And so I moved from there. I worked at Shell. I helped build their renewable energy business, which was really quite interesting, working with third generation biofuels, which is using genetically modified algae, which is that link to the genetics and intellectual property. I was helping them protect that. And then the real accelerative part for me in terms of the entrepreneurial journey is that I was one of the early members of a company called Just Eat, which is now a FTSE 100 business. I was lucky enough to be one of the senior management that helped to build that. I'm not a founder, wasn't a founder, but I saw all the stages that took that company from startup through IPO and beyond. And that was really, really exciting. But I was also in charge of corporate social responsibility within Just Eat. And that's where the genesis of Creolus came from. And Creolus is actually a mashup of Latin, creo meaning idea and lus for light. So Creolus brings ideas into the light. My own work.
Wow. We need to read
Did
that
you
book.
trademark
Yeah, exactly. Should do. But that's the kind of stuff. But I really wanted to do something super exciting. Many people are afraid of science. And so you need people who understand it, who are able to articulate it, but also can see that these great ideas start off in a test tube. And they need to be brought into the light by people who understand them and also can actually bring them out into the mainstream by having the right sort of connections and the right conversations.
So do you think you're in a bit of a niche where you are, because actually a lot of other investors aren't looking at these scientific solutions because they don't understand them? They're actually more interested in the kind of sexy world of Silicon Valley and the digital, new digital startups that can scale quickly and amass loads of data, and you can exit a billionaire.
Yeah, well, that's exactly why we're here. Totally agree. I do think there is a very heavy-weighted proportion of investment goes into super sexy ideas, I suppose, without denigrating blockchain and AI, which is obviously really important. But that's where a lot of the focus is, because it's possibly easy to understand. When we get to chemistry, it requires a different skill set. And that's why we think we are unique, because we have people who really understand the science alongside people who really know how to protect it. And then, as I said, people who really know how to build a business around that to make it commercially viable.
And that's basically what we're talking about here, right? Is that there are unique sources of value that no one else has figured out yet. And why you are both doing what you're doing is because you think you've found a unique source of value that maybe sits between the cracks of the way to traditional business, traditional investors, traditional startup, incubators, accelerate. No one's looking and no one's spotting this. So, John, you got on to mentioning the systemic nature of the challenge and therefore the solution for that challenge that could capture that value. Can you unpick that a little bit, maybe with Stuffster as the example?
Well, sure, of course. Why not, right? Yeah, well, I mean, the context for us is that 98% of the things, so you're talking about capturing value. So 98% of the things people buy capture no residual value at all, right? Only 2% of things ever go through a resale marketplace and actually bring value back to the original owner. So it's a complete void. And we knew that if we could find some way to actually capture that value and bring it to the surface, then there's tremendous opportunity and that everybody can win from that.
And what we're saying there is literally you've got a garage full of stuff. You spend $100 on a surfboard or something. You have it for 5 years and then you kind of landfill it, or you
well, yeah, typically
you'd
you'd use it for 5 years and then it would sit there for another 20 years and then you would move homes and you would throw it away. Right?
But there is
would have no
inherent
value
value in that surfboard.
Absolutely.
And that's where that's the value that you're capturing.
Absolutely. But for us to actually capture that value and bring it to the surface, we can't do that on our own. We had to come up with a way that presented a consumer proposition that made it as easy to recirculate those things as to leave them sitting in your garage for 25 years. And to do that, we had to have partnerships. We had to find ways to work with others to bring that to light, which I think is true of most of the circular economy. I mean, the circular economy is not we're going to build a widget and sell the widget kind of ecosystem, right? It's an interconnected system. And to make things work, you've got to have relationships with all the other players that make that go. For us, the primary relationship is with retail, because retail is that critical connection between product and consumer, right? They're the only ones that know where that connection gets made.
That's where you, over the till, you buy your surfboard, and that retailer knows that you, John, have bought a surfboard.
That's right. And from Stuffster's standpoint, we knew that the only way for us to actually be successful in what we were trying to accomplish was to capture the information and that connection before a product walked out the door. I mean, as soon as someone buys something and walks out a door, if there's not any kind of record of that can be repurposed, it's lost forever, right? I mean, there's no consumer connection between a buying decision and a disposal decision, right? You usually don't remember where you bought it, when you bought it, any of that by the time it's sitting in your garage for 20 years. So we had to make that connection. And to make that connection, we had to engage retailers. We had to make them partners. And when we first started Stuffster, people thought we were crazy, right? Why would a retailer ever want to work with you on reselling products? Because it's going to cannibalize new sales, it's going to degrade the brand, it's going to have all these horrible effects. But we didn't really believe that. We believed that there were actually ways to make this beneficial for all, which comes back to this uncaptured value. And if you're actually bringing to the surface the value of 98% of the things people buy, there's a lot of money to go around.
So can you unpick that a little bit with the John Lewis example? So why are John Lewis using Stuffster?
So there are, I think, three fundamental reasons that John Lewis or any retailer is interested in working with Stuffster. The first is that the basis of the model, and this is very much by design, is to directly benefit the retailer financially, right? So when we buy something from a retailer customer, we're not actually paying cash out, we're paying cash to the retailer to buy essentially an e-gift card that we then ship to that customer. Right. So in the case of John Lewis, we would have been one of the major customers of John Lewis. If as soon as we start to expand this out, it's just an amazing flow of cash that's going directly to them. So we are really a customer of theirs in that sense.
Right. Okay. So let me just get that straight. So I've got my surfboard, which I bought from John Lewis, which I don't think is possible.
I'm
in
not
this
sure
country.
they sell those,
but
yeah.
I then liquidate that through Stuffster, and in return, instead of getting cash in my bank account, I get store credit that I have to then spend back at John Lewis.
Yeah, which of course for John Lewis is great because you also have Waitrose grocery stores. You can use that store credit out.
Right.
But yes, that's right. And by doing that, we were able to build a system where the retailer has this amazing incentive to get every single customer using this and doing this and being a part of it. The second thing was that, as we found from the John Lewis pilot, customers love this, right? People certainly want to capture value. They also want to be able to declutter their lives, but do it in a way that doesn't actually expend any energy on their part, right? If I can just push a button and everything gets cleared out, that's beautiful. And the third part is that people generally, they may not be environmental activists, but just about everybody cares where it goes, right? Nobody wants things going to landfill. And so the fact that we were able to essentially make a promise that anything that came to us was not going into landfill, it was going to be repurposed in the best possible way, was a real benefit as well. So those are all kind of consumer propositions that the retailers like because they just delighted their customers. Yeah. And the last piece of this is that we actually channel back to the retailers the key data of what's going on post-sale.
There's always a data.
There's always data, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's really important because it gives retailers for the first time ever, visibility into what's happening post-sale. And they can start to use that information to make, in the short term, different decisions about what products they stock, how they promote those products, all of that. Longer term, our hope is that they use that data to begin to identify circular models that could work for them, right? Certain types of products that could be in a subscription model or a leasing model, where they can really begin to have the understanding necessary to implement those changes.
So you're creating almost the information infrastructure that could enable more circular business models that are actually driven
that is,
by John Lewis.
That is a very intentional goal of ours, yes. We want to give them the information they need to start looking into the future and change these models.
Yeah. And so, Jeff, just coming to because it's slightly different, John's relying on partnerships in a partnership with a retailer. So to be able to unlock this value, it's a symbiotic. You need them, they need you. Together, you generate value. What you guys are doing is actually partnerships or bringing together different perspectives, but in more of a multidisciplinary approach,
Yes.
right? Because the value that you see maybe sits between different specialisms within scientific areas, and so you need different perspectives to be able to understand that value and unlock it. Can you just put some colour on that? Explain what that means.
Yeah, sure. I suppose I go back to genetics and biology. Really, what we are looking to work and alongside with people like John and so on is creating an ecosystem. We are all parts of an ecosystem. In order to create a circular economy, no one person has everything. We need innovations. Mm-hmm. We need people who are going to grow that innovation. Then we have also need for people to buy that innovation, and ultimately getting it back to whether it's to keep it in use and so on. But what we, as a company or as a fund, in effect, will be doing is what runs through all of this is a financial part to this. It's great having a great idea, but you need people who understand that idea to see whether actually should it come to light or not. And then once it's starting to come to life, you still need money to enable it to get to the next stage, commercial stage, then to be something that a large company might want to purchase. Because one has to also understand that big companies, whilst they have innovation arms, they still have shareholders and obligations to ensure that they are making the right decisions. And so what we do is we're focused on that very, very early stage, take the high risk. And so you need to gear yourself up to be able to manage that risk. And the way that we do that is by having people who really understand it. Because with no disrespect, not every single scientist is a great business person. And so what we are here to do is to help bridge that gap, understanding what the concepts are, being able to translate those to understand, actually, is there something that one can build out of that? And then assisting, whether it is assisting in terms of building a team or connecting them to the right people within our ecosystem, to then say, okay, you've got a great test tube idea. This is probably what you need to do to get to the next level. We'll help you do that, and we know that's going to require money because you're going to have to find people or time or lab space, etc., or trials. That all costs money, and that's why we're here. We're here to take that, assist with that risk, and get things into the light.
And that we were talking earlier, a bit of a spoiler alert for one of the startups we'll be talking about in a moment, but we were looking at one of those startups, and it was really interesting from a circular economy innovation perspective. But you had some concerns over the commercial viability of some of the processes they were.
Yes.
So that business acumen, like you say, it doesn't necessarily sit with the scientists who are figuring this stuff out.
Absolutely, and it shouldn't necessarily be a problem. That's why I'm passionate about doing this, and having not been an investment professional for many years, I think is why it creates a really unique opportunity. Because if you look at it logically, a scientist being great at science is because they are a scientist. Why would you then suddenly expect them to be the best business person? So if you don't have that, then you need to plug in the best business person alongside that science, and if you can both communicate well, then that's your happy days, as they say. Right?
And so can you make a little comment on, we're kind of comparing, you think you're in a unique space because you're looking at science, kind of this like new R&D processes, versus a lot of the money is flowing into the digital solutions, apps and stuff. I suppose the opportunity with the digital stuff is that it can grow very, very quickly, and you can get a return very quickly.
Yes.
The challenge with starting with an idea that's in a test tube and actually getting that to a point where a big company would be interested in kind of being a supplier of you or a customer of you.
Yes.
That could be quite a long time. So how challenging is it to raise the money in that context where actually it's a longer payback period?
Yes. So there's two parts to that. Fundamentally, the people that invest in a science space have to understand that it's not a 1 minute or a 1 year opportunity. Some of them are actually. There's some really interesting ideas that we look at which have, within a year, have really scaled. So it's, again, it goes to the point that you have to have the right investor. You'll be tackling the right investor for the right product. There's no point going to a digital investor with a new plastic bottle, for example, or non-plastic bottle. There's no point. They won't understand it. And with no disrespect to those investors out there that are able to multitask, but it needs to be focused. You need to have the right people who understand the right type of fields.
So are you finding that there are the people that you're going to for money, they get that, they get this bigger opportunity. They might not call it the circular economy,
Right.
but they just see the logic and the business
Absolutely.
value.
And as I said, we are still mid-fundraise, and it's fascinating. The people that are coming to us are, everybody knows they want to do something, but they don't necessarily know what they can do. And this is why we are, I suppose inundated is a nice word, why we're really excited about this, because there are people who go, right, I can actually see there's logic to what you're intending to do. You've talked about this $470 billion market, so there's definitely something there. And certainly now we're in this massive wave, certainly with Ellen MacArthur raising the awareness, and obviously we know about the Blue Planet and so on, how plastic is a really understood now issue. All these things are perfect in terms of enabling us to be at the right time, in the right place. Fingers crossed.
There you go. When do you close the fund?
That's a very good question.
Okay, can we talk about that? You never know with this stuff.
We hope certainly mid next year at the latest. Okay. But what's highly frustrating for us is that we have so many great opportunities coming to us, and do keep sending them to us, that we just want to be able to action on them. And that's the mild frustration. But we'll get there. We will get there.
And what about you, John? But raising money with this concept that is.
It's so easy. So easy.
I get the sense that you're not being strictly honest with us there.
Well, no. And I think actually, to all of those who competed today, I think it's just kind of inherent in circular economy that because it is an ecosystem, because it is not building just a widget and you put it out there, that it's a more complex pitch to investors than a lot of other businesses typically. And you're looking at things really from a different perspective, right? And I think, in general, you can say circular economy is a completely different view of the world. It's analyzing things from a very different viewpoint. And so communicating that to the investment community has been challenging. I think the other part of it is that it does, as I was describing, it requires partnerships, it requires relationships, and that's inherently a little more risky for investors because it's not all under your control. You have to be able to convince others to be a player.
And so, Stuffs has been around for a couple of years now. So are you sensing a change as you're talking to investors? Are people becoming more open to this opportunity, even though it maybe brings a bit more complexity?
I'd say there are incremental gains, right? And those incremental gains tend to be not just kind of holistic, circular economy, what a great investment opportunity. It's more specific to the business that's being presented. So in our case, re-commerce in general has become a much hotter area, right? Re-commerce is growing at 24 times retail right now.
Wow.
And that's, partly a circular economy story. It's partly an economy story. There are a bunch of different factors that go into that. But you now have several startup companies that have, passed the $1 billion valuation mark that are doing pure re-commerce. And so to the extent that we can show that what we're doing is really kind of the whole next generation of that, then people go, well, tell me more about that. And that's something that's been developing kind of on its own over the last 2 years, for example. And so that's definitely helpful for us.
And your use of language, how you're positioning it, you're just trying to plug it in to the trends that some of these guys are thinking. They might not be calling it a circular economy solution. Re-commerce is the word.
Jeff can probably attest to this to some extent. But every venture capitalist they have a set of buckets, right? And you need, as an entrepreneur, you have to proactively determine which bucket you want to be in. Right? And I think one of the challenges of the circular economy is there's no circular economy bucket. Right? There are a few firms that are now starting to try to build an expertise in the circular economy space, but there is no such thing as a circular economy bucket, right? There is a app bucket and a e-commerce bucket. I mean, you've got these various things out there, and if you don't proactively decide which bucket you want to be in and channel all knowledge and activity in that direction, you're going to get thrown in a bucket you don't want to be in. And that's a really, I think, critical message for entrepreneurs. You have to be proactive in deciding which buckets exist and which bucket you want to be placed in.
That's great to have a little tip for our applicants, and I'm going to come back to you both in a moment with a question around some advice for the people that have applied or might be considering launching innovations in this area, looking for finance. But what we did say today is that the winner of the Startup Day, this Startup Day, will get access and membership to the CE100. Stuster, Creolus are both members of the CE100. But we thought it might be helpful just to play a little primer, so those joining for the first time, haven't heard of the CE100, get a bit of an understanding of what it involves. And I think we've got the video lined up.
The circular economy is a framework for building an economy that's regenerative by design. Nothing's lost, everything is transformed. CEOs, politicians, designers, and the next generation are already using the idea to rethink the future. An idea estimated to be worth more than $1 trillion to the global economy. Discovering what works and what doesn't. People are now identifying new designs, materials, and business models. But innovation across the economy is fragmented, a barrier to skill. The CE100 brings together a group of global businesses, emerging innovators, and regions, and fast-tracks this process by supporting in 3 ways. Jen works for an IT business in California, looking to increase circular value. She wants to hit the ground running, so uses the CE100 library to access best practice guidance, saving time and money. Chang works for a consumer goods manufacturer in Qingdao. He understands the circular economy, but needs people across his business to get it too. After putting colleagues on the CE100 online exec education course, he has the team he needs to transform his business. Now connect Jen, Chang, and 98 other global businesses with a group of emerging innovators and regions through a program of workshops in the US, Asia, and Europe. The CE100 is a group of pioneers who believe that individual people within individual businesses will struggle to build a circular economy, but that working together, they can.
So that was the CE100. John, you've been a member for some time in the CE100. I don't know if you could maybe share an anecdote of the benefits of your participation in this?
Well, I think for us, the CE100 has been unbelievably helpful. And we were fortunate enough to join, a few years ago. And I think the network that we were able to forge with other emerging innovators, with major corporations that are really trying to push the envelope and try to move into circular models, gave us tremendous insights and relationships that we were able to leverage to actually build the business and get everything going. I mean, take the John Lewis partnership, for example. I mean, it was through the CE100 that we ultimately got that introduction to John Lewis, and that's how the whole thing got started, right? It just never would have come without the CE100.
So that access is key.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And so, Jeff, we've got people at home who maybe have an idea, maybe there's some point already in trying to ask for some money for it. I don't know if you've got any kind of tips or hints for people who are in that situation, maybe just starting out, to think, how do you approach an investor?
Yeah, okay. Just at a very high level, there's sort of 3 general things that an investor will look at. And you have to sometimes think about it, if it was your money, what would you want to see? And of course, the idea is wonderful. We'll take that as read. But the things that we would be looking at is 1, people, 2, the purpose, and 3, the planning. And I'll explain what each one of those is. The people, I'm sure you've heard about this before. An investor wants to know who is behind this wonderful idea? Do they have, what capabilities do they have? What gaps are there? And be honest about the gaps. Don't be afraid to say, well, actually, I don't understand numbers. I'm not a great business person, but I am a brilliant scientist and we have got a great idea. That's fine. And then the second part of that is about the purpose and what's the issue it's trying to solve, and does it align with what I know? So you have to cater for the investor's intent. We get an awful lot of inbound random requests for us to invest, but we invest and will invest rather in the plastic space. But I get questions about mental health. I get questions about putting money into new cement blocks for real estate investments, which have nothing to do with our investment focus.
It's like a scattergun approach.
Absolutely. So again, be selective in who you are going to be approaching. They are human beings, they've got a certain amount of time, and they look decidedly more positively on somebody who's really chosen them. We're human beings. So if you say, actually, I've been following what you've been up to, I'm really interested in who you are and how you come across and so on, I'd very much like to have a conversation with you. So that's and the purpose links to that. So why are you doing it? Does it fit with us? And the third one is about planning. So yes, you've got a great idea. Yes, you've got a team and you've worked out what your gaps are. Yes, you've worked out what issue you're trying to solve. The next piece is how you might do that. So put some thought into, this is the gap that we see, and this is possibly how we might plug that gap. Maybe if you're not great at numbers, but you say, well, this is how we estimate, because we've done, at least do some research on what the market might be. So then it makes it easier for somebody at a cursory glance to be able to say, wow, that size market, that hole being plugged, yep, I can relate to it because it's something I do understand. Oh, let's have another conversation. And it shows that you are thinking, and that's the key bit. We have lots of what we call inbound, and the people that stand out are those that take the time to think.
And make it easy for you, right?
Well, I think make it easy only from the perspective that we have to separate the wheat from the chaff in terms of if you've made an effort, then it shows that you're probably going to make an effort even when you have someone else's money on board. Right. That's the piece. It's not about making it easy for us because none of this is easy. Setting up businesses is not easy. It's a hit and miss often, but it is. You need hard work, and you need to be able to show and demonstrate to somebody who's going to give away some money. It may not necessarily all be our own, but if somebody was asking you for some money, you'd want to know, have you done it before? What are you going to be doing with it? When am I going to get it back? What are the chances of me actually getting something a little bit more back? You will ask those questions if it was your money. And so that's the kind of thing you have to think about.
They've got to put themselves in your shoes, and it's science. A lot of it's kind of common sense stuff. Right?
Yes.
Right, so next up we are going to hear from and discuss the 3 finalists. Before we do so, my colleague Piers has a video about what's coming up next at the DIF.
Yo, 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 it's Joe, and I'm here to tell you what else to check out at the DIF. Drop the beat. Tomorrow at 5 in the studio, you'll hear some more stuff that you don't know. From an Urban DIF Dream team with clout, here's the topic they'll be talking about. How can circular economy regenerate the city? Find out tomorrow at 5 p.m. GMT. You've heard about this film, I'm willing to bet. A feature-length production called System Reset, made by Colin Webster. He's usually pretty lazy, but for this job, he turned into Scorsese. If you want to find out how we make it happen, tune in on the 23rd. Happen. Now, Murphy's your host, and he's where it's at. But if you haven't had enough of this beardy, you can see this great session now on Catch Up. Only one bit where he picked it up. It's about an idea called Cradle to Cradle, and the homie Bill McDough got insights by the ladle. And for a dose of comedy heaven, skip right on to the last 30 seconds. Peace! Word to your mother. Back to the studio.
I mean, I just don't know what to say about that. That wasn't Piers, that was Joe. I would hate for Piers to be accused of such a horrendous interlude. Okay, so let's get into the startups. We've selected 3. Thanks to everyone who has applied. It was competitive. We've already had a bit of kind of arm wrestling in the corridor around these. The 3 that we've selected are Cafe Bueno, Nairobi, and 3 Killer. And what we're going to do now is hear from those applications. We're going to see their application video, and we're just going to talk through and maybe, hopefully, give some feedback to the guys that have applied, but ultimately pick our winner. So if we could hear from Cafe Bueno.
Cafe Bueno is a circular economy startup using biotechnology and coffee's byproduct as a platform to produce natural ingredients for cosmetics, nutraceuticals, and functional foods.
We recycle coffee from different hotels, cafes, and offices around Copenhagen, and then we extract an antioxidant-rich oil that is used as an ingredient for natural cosmetics.
We sterilize them and process them to make sure they are in the utmost quality to be reused again in the food industry as a nutritious coffee flour.
This coffee flour is naturally gluten-free.
It has more proteins than lentils and more potassium than a banana.
And it's rich in insoluble dietary fibers, which provides a prebiotic effect.
We are continuously researching and developing more ingredients from recycled coffee grounds that can address skin and health conditions.
From every ton of coffee waste we recycle, we avert the release of 340 cubic meters of methane.
Our goal for the next year is to recycle 5 tons of coffee waste monthly, and we aim to recycle 60 tons by the end of the year.
Since we come from Colombia, we know how hard it is for coffee farmers to make a decent living.
This is why we have come up with plans to relocate part of our profits back into the farms.
If you want to know more, please join our Disruptive Innovation Festival session on the 21st of November and find out more about what we're doing.
See you.
Okay, that's the boys from Cafe Bueno. Any reflections, Jeff? I'll start with you. Maybe positives.
Sure. I think it was a nice, if you're just looking at the video as a whole, it tells you what their purpose is. So you have an idea what they're trying to achieve, which is great. You understand what they're plugging as well. They're making full use of a material which is a waste, and it obviously can fit quite nicely with the circular economy, which is great. So I like all of that. My question with the hat moving to the other side is possibly it needs an explanation of how it's done. Is it a super expensive process at the moment? Does the process use an awful lot of chemicals as a byproduct? So what's the whole life cycle of that? You know, when you take in all the processes in that. So that would be the question that I would have straight away looking at that. And as well as obviously, is any of that protectable? Because in order for us to put
IP lawyer background coming in.
Indeed.
And that's the point you were talking about earlier, right? That you can have great ideas, work in the lab, work at a small scale, but the commercial viability of those is key.
Yes, absolutely. And unfortunately, it is just the way of the world, because if you want investment, remember they need to see a return on investment. So if your idea is great, but unfortunately somebody else can do exactly the same thing somewhere else, then what's the chance of me getting money back?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's in a nutshell.
Yeah. Have you anything to add to that one, John?
Well, I mean, I think what they're doing is really, really interesting, and it's something that's, I mean, as we talked about before the program, right? It's something that's really of interest to communities and kind of municipal waste operators, because coffee grounds are just a huge problem, generally. I mean, I think the thing that I am not comfortable with yet, because we don't really know enough, is just they're looking at a bunch of different products across a broad range of different businesses, and each of those products has its own customers, its own distribution channels, its own marketing, its own, you know, it's like a whole expertise. And so are they looking at it from the standpoint of they develop these technologies that allow these things to be made, and then they license that out and other companies go and do that? Or are they thinking they're going to commercialize these and push them forward? So it's not clear to me how they're really approaching that. But
So the question's really around the business model. I think, one of the things that we did say that from a circular economy perspective was great is they were thinking about this waste becoming the feedstock,
right.
but they were thinking about high value applications, so not just thinking about, how can you get the highest value from the feedstock.
Which is great, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
It's really
absolutely.
valuable.
Okay, let's move on. Next up we have Nairobi.
Nairobi is changing the sports equipment industry by introducing circular economy in the design, manufacturing, and complete life cycle of your boards. Rethinking from scratch the way snowboards and skis are made, Nairobi developed a new manufacturing process and a new composite material to create personalized boards that looks and feels the way you want, and on top of that they are completely recyclable, so we can stop contributing to the huge wastelands of obsolete and broken equipment. We think this is amazing, an online tool to customize the boards, delivered on site with no extra luggage costs, and then return to Nairobi to get sustainable credit for the next season upgraded board. Your equipment on the cloud, zero waste on the planet. Now, think what this means for rental stores that accounts for around 70% of the snow equipment we use every year. The savings on stock renovation costs, the branded equipment, the trendy shapes and image, and the commitment with the environment. And now think bigger. We are working to use the same technology on surf, kite and wakeboards. You design and ride your snowboard until you decide to return it when the winter is over. And then you download the surfboard to catch the waves. Join us and help us recreate sports equipment.
Nairobi. That's maybe where the surfboard came lodged in the back of my mind
Yes, right,
earlier.
exactly.
John, what are your thoughts?
Well, very cool, right? And the way that they're kind of taking something that and I'm not an expert in the reprocessing of surfboards and snowboards and all that, but my general understanding is that it's a bunch of different layers, and those layers are difficult to separate, and it's a problem, right? It's really difficult to make any use out of that. And so the fact that they've come up with what may be some completely new process or new material they're using to do this, but then simplifying that manufacturing process and making it something single material that's truly recyclable, that is a huge step in its own right. I mean, I think the other part that's really interesting is having these credits at the end, right? When you finally finish the season and you're done with this board, you're passing it back and getting credit toward the next board. And I think anything that promotes a circular model in that way is a big step forward. And as they talked about with the 70% of boards going to rental operations and having those rental operators be able to recirculate their
So they're really thinking through the business model to say, how do we there's inherent value in these boards because we can feed them straight back into our process, make a new board from an old board. How do we get them back? We need to incentivize that.
Right. Now, the one thing that I think works against them is that, if you think of the classic or the kind of iconic butterfly diagram for circular economy, they're dealing with an outer loop, right? They're not taking these and putting them immediately in the hands of someone who could take that particular board and reuse it. They're reprocessing, and so I have big questions about how much energy, materials, what goes into that reprocessing, and that it would be great if they had some way of actually getting at least some portion of the boards just directly recirculated so people could use them.
Yeah, hard when they're doing that bespoke service as well.
Custom, yeah.
Anything to add from you, Jeff?
I think John's has captured it quite nicely. I think I love it. Super cool.
That's mainly because you're a snowboarder.
Yeah, and I think, which again goes to a really important point. If you're pitching to an investor, know a little bit about them, so you choose the right investor to have that conversation with.
Stalk them on Facebook.
It's that kind of thing.
See where they go on holiday.
Exactly. Is your idea? I mean, that would get my airtime in inverted commas, if you excuse the pun, because I would be interested in that. In terms of taking that hat off and looking at it systematically, they have captured, as you mentioned, looking at this, the purpose piece, why they're doing it, what they're intending to, the hole they're trying to fill, which is great. Obviously, you couldn't work out what the team's background is, which is fair enough. I would be very interested to understand a little bit more about the material, whether it could be scalable in other industries. So let's say, for example, that same board material, if it's something that's new and protectable, obviously without the IP piece going again, but if it could be used on a board for homes, for example, if it is something that is then possible to be removed when you are, in effect, redoing a house and so on, bigger applications make that opportunity even larger. So those are the kind of questions we'd love to hear a little bit more about.
Thinking about the growth.
Absolutely.
I think just maybe to summarise, that shift to going from multi-materials in a product to a single material is massive, and getting the same performance, the same function from a single material, a great innovation, and the business model piece, right? Really thinking that they want to get the boards back, old boards to new boards. We are nearly at time. The third application that we put through to the final, we haven't got a video for, but it was 3Cular. And 3Cular was essentially a new material feedstock for 3D printers. So they were taking the waste, the sawdust from sawmills, doing something with it, feeding it into a 3D printer and producing kind of wooden 3D printed parts and components. Who wants to start us off? Any questions, Jeff, for you on that one?
Again, it's technology. I think it has a potential for being a really great innovation. I'd love to know how they do it, what the process is behind it, for it to be scalable. It certainly fits with the circular economy idea. In sawdust, I can't remember the exact stat of how much is produced on an annual basis, but finding a way to anything that uses waste and puts it to a repurposed, giving it another life, I think is a great thing. My questions are, again, about what's involved, what the process is, and ultimately, is there a scalable opportunity out of that?
And John, you were quite enamoured with 3Cular.
Well, I just think it has tremendous potential. I think 3D printing has tremendous potential, right? I'm really, really excited about what can come out of 3D printing. I mean, in terms of making repair parts for items, and I mean, there are just so many different applications for it. And it's not, in this case, just that you're taking this material, sawdust, that's being thrown out and not put to good use, but you're also displacing plastics and other things that are being used in 3D printing today. So it's kind of a double plus in that sense. And I think maybe within the CE100, it could potentially be of great interest to some of the players like HP and Dell and various others
that
are really deeply getting into 3D printing, and having this alternative that's a more environmentally friendly substitute for the plastics that are used today would be a great thing.
Okay, so there's interest in all three of them. They're all great ideas, businesses, questions with all three of them as well. We couldn't get all of the information we needed.
Yeah. I mean, which makes it tough, right?
Makes it tough. You're in a hard spot here.
Yeah. Yes.
But we have to make a decision, and we're going to put it down to a vote. So maybe, John, who would you put through to the C100?
Oh boy, you have to go with me first.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, once again, on the basis of very limited information, I'd really like to answer these. I mean, I'd probably go with 3Cular just because I'm so enthusiastic about 3D printing, and I think that it's got real problems that this could actually abate.
The fact that actually if you go to any kind of makerspace, and there's actually just a lot of plastic kind of stuff that's coming out of these 3D printers.
Yes.
Who would you go for, Jeff?
I like the 3Cular. I think that there's something there, but for me, I think on what we've seen, I think Nairobi has won it for me in terms of it's got a business model that it understands, it's got some material which has an application and potentially other applications. And I love snowboards anyway, so that's another thing.
That's to your heart.
But that's one thing, yeah.
Okay, that looks like I've got the deciding
so
vote.
the power is in
How
your
convenient. I'm going to go with you, Jeff. I agree. I think all three, there were some great and different, actually, innovations with the three companies that applied. I think the information that we got through Nairobi in the business model, the fact that they were making that material selection, simplifying one material, getting the same performance, and they thought about the business model. I thought there was two really important components, and it seems like they're actually potentially in a position to kind of scale up. Right, they've kind of thought through. So Nairobi, you are joining the CE100 next year, so we'll be in touch with that. Congratulations.
That's great.
We're nearly at time. I want to finish with one last question. It's a good one that's come in from Tony online. Maybe just a brief comment from both of you. Tony says, why does everything have to be scalable? Can't a business thrive and be a success in one city, one geography? Jeff.
It depends it depends who you are and what your intent is. I'm talking from both an investor and from a business. If you're looking for money, the point is this: you're looking for something from me. I need to work out whether putting my money into your business ultimately is a better option than going to somebody else along the street to get the return back. That's if we're looking at it from a pure investor perspective. From an investor, we are looking for the best use of that money. For you as a business, it's entirely up to you as to how big you want your business to be. Mm-hmm. And it's about matching the investor with the investee. So if you're looking for something that's going to be growing in just one city, which, don't get me wrong, could be very, very, very lucrative, you just have to find and explain to the relevant investor that is as far as I'd like to go, and also these are the kind of returns that you'll get as a result of it. So there's no problem with
There's
it.
no rule. A lot of noise around scale, but actually maybe a lot of businesses get.
Does it make sense? Is it viable?
John, scalability?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's twofold, right? I mean, it's from an investment standpoint, investors want to get the best return. But I also think from just a societal standpoint, if you have an innovation that is a great economic driver, it's a great driver of sustainability, why would you want to limit that to some small geography, right? I mean, you want to have that propagate across the entire universe. Mm-hmm. You want to get as much of a reach as you can possibly get. Why keep it sequestered over in this small space?
Great. That's all we've got time for. Oh. John, Jeff, thank you so much for coming down. We have to run now to catch the ferry, the 6:15 off Cowes. Thank you all for those that applied. Congratulations to the three who got through. There was some kind of slight tension in the corridor outside before we did settle on Nairobi. Nairobi, congratulations, and we'll be in touch about your membership with the CE100.